Howdy y'all, welcome back, thank you for being here. Recently, I did a bit of research into the largest tunnels in all of history, and quickly I was pointed in the direction of New York City. The vast water supply that is necessary to support a city of this magnitude might be expected, but the far more fascinating aspect is that much of the water for New York City comes from dozens of miles, in some cases well over 50 miles away, and flows primarily through underground aqueducts before reaching the Big Apple. Furthermore, one of these underground water systems is actually still in construction and has been since the 1970s, and this underground aqueduct is considered the largest capital construction project in New York City history. We will get into all of that and more in today's video, but first, let us take a step back to the 17th century. From the time that the first settlers arrived to New York through the year 1677, we are told the primary source of all fresh water for these people was rainwater. Then, in 1677, the very first well was founded in New York City at Bowling Green, located next to the main Dutch fort. In 1733, Bowling Green was made a public park by the British. However, it wasn't until 1776, the infamous year of American independence, that New York City received its first freshwater reservoir, which was founded on the east side of Manhattan. At that point, the population of the city had already exceeded 22,000 people. Around this time, but without a definitive date given in the narrative, we are told the public of New York City also began using Collect Pond, also aptly known as Freshwater Pond, to gather their fresh water. In many sources, Collect Pond is listed as the primary source of the New York City water system through the city's first 2 centuries of development. Collect Pond had an enormous geological feature known as Bayard's Mount, said to be a 110-foot tall mound that stood next to the pond until being leveled with the entire pond in 1811. This leveling seems to coincide with the growing of numerous businesses surrounding the pond, including a major brew house, as well as Nicholas Bayard Slaughterhouse, numerous tanneries, and the large pottery works of the Germans that were founded on Pot Baker's Hill next to the pond. The runoff from these businesses contaminated the water and subsequently caused the need for a new source of fresh water for the people of New York. In 1811, Collect Pond was destroyed. It was made into a landfill using the debris from Bayard's Mount and then turned into a public park. However, the land of the park too became dilapidated. The neighborhood, known as 5 Points, described as a notorious slum, was developed on part of what was once Collect Pond. The other side of the landfill of the former pond became the site of New York's jail, known colloquially as the Tombs. This is an absolutely old world in style building, which is reminiscent of an Egyptian mausoleum. The Tombs measured 253 by 200 feet and occupied a full block of New York City. In 1902, the original building was condemned as the foundations had begun to sink into the former pond below. Over 140 feet below the Tombs, excavations reached the bedrock, and the pond was completely emptied, and the entire block was reinforced with concrete before a new building was constructed on top, also known colloquially as the Tombs. If that wasn't interesting enough, consider this. Following Collect Pond becoming a landfill in 1811, we are led to believe that most, if not all, of New York reverted back to collecting rainwater as their primary source of fresh water. It wasn't until 1831, 20 years later, that a new water supply and distribution system opened to accommodate the city. For reference, in the year 1800, the population of New York City is listed at 60,000 people. By 1830, the population had skyrocketed to over 200,000 people, all living in the great city without a modern source for fresh water. In 1831, the new water supply and distribution system opened, with its centerpiece being one of the largest wells in American history, located between 4th and 3rd Avenue. With a diameter of 16 feet, blasted 112 feet deep into the bedrock, the resulting quarry below had well over 175,000 gallons of water inside. Using steam engines, all of this water could be distributed to the neighborhoods of New York City, and this water system also utilized a 27-foot tall tower topped by a 43-foot in diameter tank, which also held the water for the city. However, this 1831 system was not initially meant for the citizens and was intended to be used to fight the many fires that had plagued the great city. It wasn't until the founding of New York's first aqueduct, a project that began in 1837, that a full-fledged system was put into place to supply the residents of the Big Apple with clean, fresh water. Up until that point, the Manhattan Company sold fresh water to the most affluent in New York beginning in 1799. The Manhattan Company eventually became Chase Manhattan, also known today as Chase Bank. The first major freshwater system was known as the Croton Aqueduct, built from 1837 through 1842. And this miraculous feat of engineering carried water over 40 miles from the Croton River to Manhattan using only gravity. The aqueduct dropped 13 inches per mile and was the brainchild of West Point graduate David Bates Douglas. To supply the aqueduct with water, the Croton River was dammed, creating the Old Croton Dam, which was also built from 1837 through 1842. Here is where we begin to see the bad luck, some would call it a curse, that's often associated with the New York City water systems. The Old Croton Dam was the first major or substantial masonry dam ever built in the United States of America. When nearly complete, or by some estimates already complete, the old world-style dam was destroyed and washed away by the Great Winter Storm of January 1841. It was rebuilt in roughly 1 year. So, according to this narrative, we have the massive Croton Dam, said to be the first major masonry dam ever in United States history. This dam was over 600 feet long, it was over 57 feet tall, and it was initially constructed over 4 years. Then it was washed away in a storm, and it was rebuilt in less than 1 year. However, the real meat and potatoes of the Old Croton Aqueduct would have to be the Croton Distributing Reservoir, also known as the Murray Hill Reservoir. This is another absolutely immense Egyptian revival piece of architecture being founded in New York City directly before the advent of photography. What a coincidence! Here is another really interesting aspect of this architecture as well. This is known as the High Bridge. This was part of the Croton Aqueduct, and this went over the Harlem River. So I found some really incredible old world or pre-1900 photographs of this, and this architecture is just so remarkable for this time period. The Old Croton Reservoir was partially built on top of, some would say built adjacent to the affluent African American community known as Seneca Village. Remarkably, however, Seneca Village was not just home to free men or African Americans, but was considered a welcoming village to all that had been disparaged by New York City, and roughly 1/3 of Seneca Village were considered to be Irish Americans. Seneca Village was eventually and purposefully torn down to make way for Central Park. However, others speculate this was done in an attempt to hide the historical value of Seneca Village and what might be a more hidden or esoteric history of the water systems of New York. But I digress. The Croton Reservoir was torn down in the late 1890s, just before the turn of the century. Again, we have to take it all with a grain of salt, but a similar reservoir, also Egyptian revival in architecture, also part of the Croton system, was said to have existed at the precise location that the New York Public Library sits upon today. Look at the architecture of the library, formerly called the 42nd Street Library. Here in this section, I wanted to share with you the remaining photographs that I have of the Croton Reservoir because this is an absolutely interesting, unique piece of architecture. Yes, we have other buildings just like this that are popping up in New York City right around the time period that this piece of architecture was created. We're looking at the 1820s, the 1830s, the 1840s, right around the mid-1800s, the mid-19th century. We have this Egyptian revival architecture that had, for some reason, taken hold in New York City. So I find that to be quite an anomaly, especially when we try to compare that with the narrative that we have in front of us. Nothing really explains why this was going on other than the fact that Egyptology had become a sort of craze at the time period, but this doesn't necessarily facilitate the need or the ability to create architecture in this sort of style. While the Old Croton Aqueduct could produce 90 million gallons of water per day, the new Croton Aqueduct, completed in 1890, could produce 300 million gallons of water per day. Astoundingly, we're told the new Croton Aqueduct traveled essentially the exact same path as the Old Croton Aqueduct, running parallel to it, and incorporated much of the same designs, just in a much larger scale. It's almost as if they had founded the first aqueduct, took many years to understand it, then reverse engineered the first to construct the second. The exact same thing, just much larger. But again, that is just an opinion. The narrative says that the new Croton Aqueduct replaced the old Croton Aqueduct, but both ran simultaneously for over 65 years. Now let's look at the numbers, what some might see as the symbolism. The new Croton Aqueduct is a brick-lined tunnel 13 feet in diameter and 33 miles long. The new Croton Aqueduct runs from the New Croton Reservoir, which when it was created, completely submerged and erased the Old Croton Dam. The New Croton Aqueduct ran relatively smoothly for 100 years before facing problems in the 1990s when the aqueduct was shut down. However, following construction of a water filtration plant, the 134-year-old New Croton Aqueduct is again providing fresh water for the citizens of New York. The next water supply system of New York I'd like to share with you is fascinating for two reasons. First, it was constructed beginning the whole way back in 1907, and second, this water supply system pulls water from over 125 miles away. Known as the Catskill Aqueduct, it was one of the first projects completed by New York City's Board of Water Supply. Constructed over a 9-year period and opened in 1916, the Catskill Aqueduct is a vast system of interconnected dams, reservoirs, and tunnels providing over 850 million gallons of water to New York City per day. While this is the furthest stretch of water traveling to New York City, the Catskill system includes many above-ground parts connected over a long distance. The next system that I want to discuss includes just one massive tunnel, completely underground. The last major water system of New York in usage today was constructed beginning almost 90 years ago, meaning the water systems of New York, while renovated recently, are nearly a century old. This is known as the Delaware Aqueduct, an absolutely massive feat of engineering. Again, the information here is relatively scarce for this being the most recent water supply system to have been completed in New York City. With a diameter of 13.5 feet and a length of 85 miles, the Delaware Aqueduct of New York City is considered to be the longest tunnel in the entire world, producing roughly 890 million gallons of water today, over half of New York's 1.3 billion gallon a day consumption. Those numbers are almost unimaginable. Currently, the largest water system of New York City, the Delaware Aqueduct, also has multiple known underground leaks, amounting to roughly 36 million gallons of water being lost per day. Again, what could we do with that water if we really could fix these issues, if we made things more efficient, if we shared with those who really needed it? So to fix these massive leaks that are basically wasting millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of gallons of water per week, to fix these leaks, we're told a team would have to drill anywhere from 700 to 800 feet below ground, and then after that, they would have to turn off the entire aqueduct and basically cut off over half of New York's water supply. This was supposed to have occurred in 2022, but this was delayed. Then, in 2024, it was delayed again. Now, the shutdown and the repairs to the leaks are scheduled for the end of 2024 and early 2025. So, we should be seeing the great shutdown of New York's water supply any day now, if they really, truly are planning to fix this old world aqueduct. Which brings me very nicely to the last water system of New York, which is currently still being constructed. This is known as New York City Water Tunnel Number 3 and is under development by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Construction first began in the year 1970, being authorized the whole way back in 1954 as part of larger constructions to reshape New York City that also included the World Trade Center. Stage 1 of Tunnel Number 3 was completed in 1993, opened in 1998, and cost roughly $1 billion. Section 1 bore deep through the bedrock, up to 800 feet underground, from Yonkers, where it crosses deep hundreds of feet beneath Central Park, reaching Fifth Avenue, and then runs beneath the East River, under Roosevelt Island, and into Queens. Section 2 was completed in 2008, continues through Manhattan, and was opened in 2013. Section 3 is still in early stages of construction and will run from Westchester to the Bronx. Stage 4 has not been begun at all, but is planned to run from Yonkers into Queens, into the Bronx, and unite with Stage 2, completing the full circle of the water supply system that would then cover mostly all of New York City. While Stages 3 and 4 are far from being built, the entire project is still scheduled to be completed by 2032. From 1970, the beginning of this construction, through 1998, the opening of Section 1, we are told 24 people working on the project have passed away due to injuries sustained on the job, leading many to deem the New York City Water Tunnel Number 3 project as cursed. A centuries-old city with secrets hidden in the very waters that flow beneath it. The largest city on the East Coast, a mecca of art and architecture and industry, but one which did not have a proper water system in place until the mid-1800s, the casualties of the 19th century narrative. We find that this culture was seemingly lost and found through this architecture, but the true story of the aqueducts seems to go beyond the typical drivel. Our history books will tell us a tale. But for a city that didn't have running water until the mid-19th century, it becomes frustratingly clear that the history of New York is not always as we've been told. The city that never sleeps has never had time to rest, only to reset.